back then, it was unquestionable that by the impossibly futuristic year 2000, we would have robot servants and space colonies, and we would live in this magic utopia. No one would have to work anymore. No one would get sick anymore. There wouldn't be crime anymore. There wouldn't be poverty. This was unquestionable. No one thinks that anymore. No one looks to the future as this glorious savior where the scientists are going to come and deliver us from our mortal suffering. No one thinks that. Our confidence in our mythology is falling apart. It's eroding from the inside. It's hollowing out. So the surface is still intact. The structures on the surface are intact, but the core is hollowed out. We don't really believe in it. And that makes it very fragile. I was always a very unwilling participant, even going back to grade school. On the one hand, what did I know? All the authority figures telling me, here's what a good boy does, here's what's important. I kind of bought into that to some extent. Inconsistently, got good grades and did what I was told because I was afraid not to. But I never really believed in the whole thing. I always had this vague feeling of, you've got to be kidding me. This can't be right. So I had this revolutionary leaning very early on. Also, I had other input into my consciousness that confirmed my suspicion that there was something totally wrong, an all-encompassing malady. And that input came in the form of books like 1984, Silent Spring, A People's History of the United States, books that demolished the shell of the narrative that school constructs, the historical narrative, the social narrative, that says, yeah, we've got some problems, but this is democracy, this is an incredible achievement, the Founding Fathers, the Emancipation Proclamation, this whole mythology, manifest destiny, like all that stuff. I couldn't help but dissociate from the program. Like, knowing that, how could I really participate wholeheartedly? For a while, when I first started to try to understand the state of the planet, I tried to identify the source of the wrongness. And it took me deeper and deeper and deeper. First maybe it was industry, and then it was capitalism. And then going deeper than that, it was the whole mindset of domestication, going back thousands of years. But that is built on the kind of conceptual domestication of the world through language, representational language. Maybe that was the error, the step into separation. But maybe it was even before that, fire, creating an artificial distinction between domestic and wild, and allowing us to master other species with fire. Each stage, each unfolding of the story of separation builds on something that came before it, going back to very, very ancient roots, even pre-human roots. And I thought, if it's that inevitable, and it happened everywhere in the world, like everywhere where civilization got started, all of the same things began to appear. Division of labor, money, slavery, patriarchy, ecological degradation, everywhere. So if it was inevitable, I thought, it must be happening for a reason, for an evolutionary reason. And maybe I thought for a while there's like some part of society that has escaped infection by this illness. Maybe it's the worlds of academia, the worlds of philosophy. But when I went to college and studied philosophy and mathematics, it seemed like it was there too. The same, I couldn't put a name on what was wrong. All I knew was that I felt repelled by it. I felt the desire to sabotage it. It wasn't even a moral position. It wasn't that I had like some well thought out moral position that I will not participate in this. It was a kind of an instinct that in part did take the form of rebellion, of procrastination, of not building a resume, not preparing for grad school. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Now maybe I'm just making excuses for myself. You could see me through that story if you want to preserve the integrity of the conventional realm. You've got to explain me somehow. Like, people like me are easily explainable in the language of the Matrix. So there's really nothing that I can say to you, or at least there's nothing that I can, no evidence that I can use to prove that I'm not just some second-rate discontent. Ultimately, the choice of the story that we believe is not based on evidence. It's rather that we recruit the evidence to fit the story that resonates with the state of being that attracts the belief. And then when the belief is ready to change, which happens when perhaps your state of being has changed because things have happened to you in your life that have changed you. And that old belief doesn't fit the changed being that you're becoming through maybe a crisis and a collapse, or through an amazing, mysterious experience. Now those beliefs don't work anymore. So new evidence comes. Isn't that funny? You start to notice new things. You start to accept phenomena that you had rejected as fanciful before. And the evidence comes to flesh out the belief, to serve the belief. I think that's how it works. Maybe if you're watching someone like me, listening to someone like me, if you are at that point where the old belief that is in collusion with the status quo of society is ready to change, if you're at that point where you've been going through some kind of breakdown, where the old story doesn't work for you anymore, where you don't really know who you are anymore, where you don't know what's real anymore, where you feel maybe almost a little bit dizzy, you don't know how to do this thing called life anymore. Like, that is a really tender spot. It's a really, it often becomes a very receptive place, a very vulnerable place, where people, like, you can get recruited for a cult. Cults specialize in finding people like that, who have just gone through some kind of big crisis, who are open to receive a new story, and the cult comes and says, here's a new story, here's who you are, here's how to live life, here's the way the world is. They have a totalizing discourse that answers all these questions, and that receives people coming from a dissolving story. Which means that because our society now is in a process of degeneration, more and more people, all of our institutions that held our identity, that answered those questions, the institution of marriage, the economic institutions, the educational institutions, the medical institutions that could fix you if you were broken and can't anymore, and say, oh, your disease doesn't even exist, and we can't cure it anyway. Like, all of these different dimensions of the breakdown are invading personal life and causing people's own stories to break down, which means that more and more people are susceptible to being recruited by a cult. And I'm talking about politics, aren't I? Mentioning no names, these almost cartoonish political philosophies are being offered people. And because the old stories have kind of disintegrated, they're willing to believe anything. It is a very special, vulnerable time. And I am not here to offer my own version. Here's the new story. Here's who you are. Here's the way the world works. Really what I'm saying is that if you are in this process of breakdown and not knowing who you are and what the way the world is, and watching the old certainties dissolve into mystery, and what you thought you knew dissolve into wow, that was just a story. If that's happening to you, like, that's okay. It goes counter to our training to be in a state of not knowing. You get in trouble in school if you don't know the answer. You're supposed to know the answer. You're supposed to have things under control. You're supposed to have a plan. But if you attempt to construct those when you're in this space between stories, when you're in this time of breakdown, then you're going to end up erecting some version of what you already had before. It'll seem phony. So I'd like to encourage you to abide in that space of unknowing for a while, until a new story comes to you that really resonates with who you want to become, that isn't preying on your fear, but that is inviting you into service to something that's really beautiful to you. And I'm not even saying you'll recognize it right away. Probably you'll have to have a few false starts. I used Thich Nhat Hanh's word for interbeing, that says that self and world are not separate, that what I do to the world comes back to me, that my purpose here is to give to something greater than myself, that I'm part of a larger whole, that this is my basic nature.